Showers possible over southwest England, Wales, maybe southwest Scotland, and increasingly cloudy and windy across Northern Ireland with some rain creeping in here. But it is, again, pretty mild. Temperatures double digits for the vast majority, and where we see some brightness across the south, temperatures could get up to 15 Celsius. But here comes that low pressure system, a spell of rain crossing Northern Ireland, then spreading into Scotland and through this evening into parts of West and North Wales and Northwest England, also turning blustery with further outbreaks of rain. But for much of the south and east of England, it will stay dry. Temperatures could temporarily drop down to single figures, but for most, it will be quite a mild start to Friday because of the wind. A blustery day then. Not much rain across East Anglia and the southeast, but quite a soggy morning for Scotland, parts of northwest England, and the rain will steadily spread across much of Wales and northeast England too. Showers across the south are possible, and some showers will continue for Northern Ireland. It will be a blustery day, even though, again, temperatures on the mild side, not feeling all that mild because of the gusty winds. Further rain to come through the evening across parts of central and southern Scotland. Still a few showers elsewhere, but generally things are turning drier. The rain is likely to persist, however, across Shetland into Saturday. Into the weekend, though, things are calming down once more as things start to turn drier. The winds will ease, but most will stay fairly cloudy. Goodbye.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Who could imagine a Prime Minister having to say this to an international summit of world leaders?
Genuinely believe that the UK is not remotely a corrupt country, nor do I believe that our institutions are corrupt.
Well, is he right? We'll talk to a former Downing Street advisor. Plus, is the NHS in crisis, and what can be done about dangerous dogs? But first, it's the news with Rosie.
I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 12 o'clock. 2 minutes silence has been observed to remember the men and women who lost their lives in conflict. On the 11th hour of the 11th day, on the 11th month, people across the UK paused to honour those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Armistice Day commemorates the end of the First World War. Services will also be held on Remembrance Sunday. Thousands of care home staff in England are facing job losses now that COVID vaccines have become mandatory for them. From today, staff must be double jabbed to work unless they're medically exempt. The move comes as the sector faces severe staff shortages. Figures due to be released later are expected to show that more than 50,000 care home staff still haven't received both doses. Border Force officers have intercepted at least 14 migrant boats in the Channel. Up to 50 people have been on board each boat. There's been an influx of migrants trying to reach the UK in recent days, with 1,200 crossing the English Channel in the past 48 hours. NHS waiting lists in England are at a record high as health leaders warn the system is buckling under pressure. The chief executive of the NHS Confederation says the current situation is unsustainable and patient care is being compromised. Data from NHS England shows 5.8 million people were on waiting lists at the end of September, the highest number since records began. 3 members of Parliament have been accused of getting drunk on a flight to Gibraltar. 1 Labour and 2 Scottish National Party MPs were on an official trip to visit troops. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has accused them of disrespecting the armed forces, and he says he plans to write to their parties to express his disappointment. The SNP have denied the allegation. Labour's Shadow Housing Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News recent events have created a focus on sleaze.
Let's remember why we've got this huge distraction at the moment, because Boris Johnson and his cabinet ministers decided last week that they wanted to rip up the rules that govern the standards of MPs and our conduct. The vast majority of Labour MPs, in fact probably the vast majority of MPs, but certainly the vast majority of Labour MPs, of course we hold ourselves to the very, very highest standards.
Rotherham Council is stepping up efforts to combat child sexual exploitation. A new plan has been passed which addresses problems in the borough. It follows criticism from opposition Conservatives who said not enough was being done to tackle child grooming, which the council and South Yorkshire Police dispute. The 2014 J report revealed that 1,500 children had been abused in the town between 1997 and 2013. One survivor that we're calling Elizabeth was among them. She told us about the council's plan.
Hoping that there's improvements, and there will be, but because they've been amended, I feel like they've been watered down a little bit more. I hope that Rotherham can make a stand, and I hope Rotherham can heal. Am I 100% sure that's going to happen? No.
Stephen Gerrard says Aston Villa's ambitious plans were a factor in him agreeing to become the club's new head coach. The former Liverpool and England captain has left Rangers, who he guided to the Scottish Premiership title undefeated last season. Gerrard replaces Dean Smith, who was sacked by Villa on Sunday. Mourners are gathering for the funeral of Northern Ireland veteran Dennis Hutchings, which is being held in Plymouth. The 80-year-old died from COVID last month. He was awaiting a trial over a shooting in County Tyrone during the Troubles in 1974. The funeral is being held at St Andrew's Church. Dozens of motorbikes from Rolling Thunder, which campaigns for veterans, will be part of the cortege. A new species of dinosaur with an unusually large nose has been identified by a retired GP on the Isle of Wight. Jeremy Lockwood spent years rummaging through old bones when he reconstructed a skull which had been in storage since 1978, where he discovered the unique bulbous nasal bone. The PhD student says the discovery made is one of the happiest days of lockdown. You are up to date. I'll have more in half an hour. For now, back to the briefing with Gloria.
We've got a packed show for you today. Coming up this hour on the briefing, the crisis over lobbying and sleaze is still with us. We talked to a former Downing Street advisor who says MPs should be allowed lucrative second jobs. And with NHS leaders warning that ambulance response times are double the target and putting patients' lives at risk, we talked to the Shadow Minister for Patient Safety, who says the health service is at breaking point. And we'll have the latest in my special series of interviews with MPs today. Labour MP Diana Johnson talks about the loss of her mother and asks how we can keep MPs safe at constituency surgeries. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. Our top story. sleaze just isn't going away. The Prime Minister has even had to defend second jobs to assembled world leaders at COP. Let's take a look.
And on second jobs, I would say that for hundreds of years, MPs have gone to Parliament and also done work as doctors or lawyers or soldiers or firefighters or writers or all sorts of other trades and callings. But I genuinely believe that the UK is not remotely a corrupt country, nor do I believe that our institutions are corrupt. And I think it's very, very important to say that. We have a very, very tough system of parliamentary democracy and scrutiny, and not least by the media.
Well, the media can't make pleasant reading for the Prime Minister today, with reports quoting some Tory MPs even comparing the crisis to Black Wednesday. But how serious is it really? Joining me now to discuss this is former Downing Street advisor Tim Montgomery. Tim, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. It's a pretty unfortunate moment, isn't it, to hear the Prime Minister say, when the world is watching, Britain isn't a corrupt country.
It is, and it's obviously there is a huge focus on getting a resolution to the climate crisis that we face, and this is not where the Prime Minister would have chosen to be. But I largely, almost completely agree with him. The very fact that we've had now a week-long controversy about the issues that most of your viewers, Gloria, will be well familiar with. This is a country that when there are incidences of corruption, perceived corruption or sleaze, the media takes them very seriously, quite rightly. And we have the robust institutions within our democracy, such that when the government made the mistake that it did last week, it reversed it overnight. And I think everyone should take comfort from that we have a very low tolerance for bad behaviour in this country, and long may that continue.
Prime Minister has been asked multiple times to say sorry for trying to unsuspend Owen Paterson. It does seem that in politics, sorry is the hardest word, doesn't it?
It is a hard word for us to say, all of us, I think, in whatever walk of life we are. But I think the most important thing that the government did was that it changed course after it was clear that opposition parties' public opinion was so unhappy. And I think there are certainly ministers, I don't know whether Boris Johnson has quite done it. I certainly think he should have been at Monday's debate. I think it was a mistake for him not to be there and get on top of the issue. But other ministers have certainly expressed regret. And the most important thing is that the government changed a policy that was obviously sustainable when opposition parties made it clear they wouldn't cooperate with the government's proposed new arrangements for governing controversial sleaze allegations.
How cross are Conservative MPs about the events of last week, about having to go through the voting lobbies for the decision then to just be reversed?
Well, if it's sort of a 0 to 10 scale, and 0 is completely happy and 10 is very cross, they're sort of up there, I think. MPs are very unhappy indeed. But I think one of the most interesting things, and perhaps the most underreported, or one of the more underreported aspects of this, Gloria, is the division between different cohorts of MPs. And I think this is a problem for the Prime Minister and the government going forward. There is a real gap between the MPs who just joined Parliament, who very much have a view that being an MP, a constituency MP, is a full-time responsibility, and more experienced MPs who've been around the block once or twice, who actually think that it's a little bit more complicated than that. Regardless of that specific division, what there is just a general problem in the Conservative Parliamentary Party of a lack of understanding between those different cohorts. I think it's been exacerbated by the fact we've had the pandemic. They haven't had the experience, Gloria, that you had when you first entered Parliament, of just getting to know your colleagues properly. We've all been living in this sort of semi-lockdown world, and I think the normal relationships that have built trust and understanding within an intake, between intakes of MPs, haven't been built.
Conservative MPs back on side.
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
Do you have any advice for him on how he might get grumpy Conservative MPs back on side?
Grumpy is probably understating the mood at the moment, but yeah, I think it isn't just about sleaze action. I think him recognising that he has a broader problem is perhaps particularly important. There is just this general sense of concern, I think, across the country amongst a lot of Conservative voters, whether it's cuts in the aid budget, some of the rhetoric towards the European Union, that the government just is a little bit sloppy, a little bit too confrontational. And I think generally just being aware that, yes, the Conservative Party absolutely has to look after the red wall voters that gave Boris Johnson such a big majority at the last election. That needs to be done. But there are sort of more traditional Conservative voters who are just sort of worried at the tone of this government, that it just looks a little bit almost tabloid and not sort of perhaps sensitive enough to the range of views that different voters have. And I think there's a complacency at the heart of government at the moment, a lack of fear about the Labour Party, a confidence that they will win the next general election. And that arrogance, I think, there's a smell that I think the average elector is picking up about that arrogance. And how Boris Johnson cures his government of that is a particular challenge.
Very interesting. Let's look at the wider point about whether MPs should have second jobs. I don't think any of you will care at all about sort of people being doctors or nurses. But the question is about paid consultancy and directorships and whether they should be banned. What's your view?
Well, I don't think they should be banned. I think ultimately it's a choice for voters at elections. Look, you were an MP, Gloria, and there is this view at the moment that being an MP is a full-time job. A constituency MP is a full-time job. By the nature of how it works, it isn't. You became a shadow front bencher, I think, for your party. You served on the front bench. And when you became that front bencher, you were, focusing on whatever brief you had. And that's true of every person who becomes a minister or a shadow minister. They become a transport minister or a health minister. By the nature of taking on that extra role, they're no longer full-time. And then over time, quickly or sort of later, they stop being a front bencher. And to ask a lot of them to go back to only focusing on their constituency, some of them just won't want to do that. It won't be interesting or challenging enough for them, and we will lose the experience that they have in Parliament. And I think that's a general problem at the moment. We don't have enough experienced MPs in Parliament. I think on your specific point about taking on consultancy or that sort of thing, I would prefer MPs to focus on professions that they sort of already had contact with, involvement in before they became an MP. So if they were a doctor or a lawyer or a farmer, they carry on that after they have been a minister. But if you start sort of taking on transport consultancies or economic consultancies related to the job that you've just undertaken, that's where I think a lot of the ethical questions arise. Even saying that, though, I wouldn't ban it. I would let voters in MPs' constituencies decide whether they think that's appropriate or not at every general election.
Montgomery, it's always so interesting to get your insights. Thank you for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's move on to a story that probably matters more to people's everyday lives than sleaze, the NHS. With the news today that ambulance wait times are approximately double the official target. Health leaders have said that patient safety could be compromised, not to mention the news that COVID jabs will be mandatory for NHS staff from next year, with warnings that this will put even more pressure on staffing. So are we facing a full-blown crisis in our NHS this winter? Joining me now is Shadow Minister for Public Health and Patient Safety and Labour MP for Nottingham North, Alex Norris. Alex, it is good to see you. Thank you for joining us today. 5.8 million patients are waiting for routine surgery. Those are figures that have come out today. That shows that we need more staff in the NHS, not less. Isn't forcing them to have a jab by April going to jeopardise that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we should be really, really startled by those figures. They are the highest on record. They're the sign, yes, of what's happened due to the pandemic, but actually what a decade of underinvestment in our health service actually means. And we have real reservations that at this point, as you say, the push to mandatory vaccinations may take staff out. So we said that, and we've been able to get the government to delay that till next April. What we now must do is use that time to properly talk to the Royal Colleges, properly talk to trade unions, properly engage with staff, to drive up vaccination rates, to deal with people's legitimate concerns about it, to deal with some of the misinformation. We've only got a few months. We must use that really well.
And care homes don't have any time at all, because as of midnight last night, no jab, no job. What's your response to that?
Yeah, well, we didn't vote for that. I think, I have real concerns about that in my community here in Nottingham, but more generally across the country. We know we already have really brutal shortages in social care staff, which is part of the knock-on effect onto the health service and why we have more people in hospital than we want. And, we said to the government we didn't think this was a wise thing to do. We encouraged the government to use the time, because this was voted on a number of months ago before the summer, to use the time to engage with trade unions, to engage with professional bodies. They haven't done that, and I'm really worried about the impact that that's going to have on social care and then again on the NHS. But once again, it shows at the very heart of government a lack of strategic planning here, understanding of the real world, and it's all our communities that are going to suffer from that.
Well, let's look at Sajid Javid's words. Maybe it's because they care. He said, let's think about the situation where that nurse stayed in that role or remained unvaccinated and was perhaps infected by COVID, going around ward to ward, patient to patient. Perhaps it's your grandma, your uncle, your granddad, and infecting them. We wouldn't want that situation. So what option does he have?
Well, yeah, let me just be very clear. We want everybody to be vaccinated, NHS workers, social care workers, whoever it is, because we know that's best for the individual, it's best for all of us. But it's okay making that emotional case, because you can also make an emotional case that says, what if that member of staff isn't there? What quality of care will a person get if there is no staff there? If they're sat in an ambulance outside a hospital for many hours? Actually, I don't think, throwing this into an emotional argument like the health secretary is trying to do is a very wise way of dealing with it. Instead, I think this is a real pragmatic meat and potatoes issue that says not enough of our healthcare staff are vaccinated, and that we need to engage with them on an individual level to find out why that is and deal with those legitimate concerns, just as we have in the rest of the population. And I think that's a much better way than, as I say, resorting to emotional arguments, which clearly haven't worked so far.
There are fears that hundreds of understaffed care homes could be forced to close. Dozens have already reduced their capacity or stopped taking in new admissions. What do we do about that real practical problem here and now?
Yeah, in many ways, actually, the challenges in social care are easier to deal with than the vacancies in health service. It takes years and years to grow a doctor, to develop a nurse. We know that the issue in social care is not necessarily that you can't hire staff, it's that you can't retain them. Because actually the work, whilst very important, socially useful, dignified work, is very hard, as we would all imagine from our own connections with family that are maybe in the social care system. But also because it's low paid. So people go and do other options. They work in a bar, work in a restaurant, things that for the same money but less stress. So, over the last decade, the government have spent, years and years taking money out of social care that we need to get back into local authorities and into social care to raise that hourly rate of pay so that, they are better able to recruit and to retain staff. We could deal with those vacancies quite quickly. I don't think the one thing you wouldn't do, though, is at a stroke, risk losing tens of thousands of staff, as we're doing today with the government's rush through mandatory vaccination programme. So not only are they not doing the things they need to do to make it better, and they didn't do enough in the budget 2 weeks ago on that, they're now actively making it worse. And that's, again, a continuation of a decade of abysmal failure in social care.
Alex Norris, Labour MP, Shadow Health Minister, we're very grateful for your time. Thanks very much. After the break, we'll be talking dangerous dogs with the MP whose 10-year-old constituent was tragically killed in a horrific dog attack earlier this week. Don't go away.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Now, on Monday afternoon, 10-year-old Jack Liss went to play at his friend's house after school. He never came home. He was attacked and killed by an American pit bull-type dog. The dog's owners were not at home at the time. They'd only bought the animal a fortnight earlier from a roofer worried it would hurt his other animals. The 28-year-old woman who was the new owner has been released on bail. Police are investigating whether the animal was a banned breed. Jack Liss's mother has paid tribute to her beautiful and sweet son. The local MP for Caerphilly, Wayne David, is calling for an urgent review into dangerous dog laws, and he joins me now. Wayne, it's great to see you, although terrible circumstances in which we speak. How would you describe what happened to Jack?
Well, it is absolutely appalling, and I want to pay my tribute to the local community for the way they've rallied behind the family, and my condolences go to the family on what was an absolutely horrific attack. But I think it's important that, although we recognise just how bad the situation was, we do learn lessons from what happened, because this was not a one-off attack. We've seen over the last 10 years some 20 people being killed by dangerous dogs, and 200,000 people across England being injured by dangerous dogs. And it strikes me that the legislation as it exists is not fit for purpose, and we do require an urgent review by the government of the legislation, and as a consequence of that, we need it strengthened dramatically.
In your view, what is it about the existing law that needs to be reviewed?
Well, at the moment, there are 4 prescribed dogs, types of dogs on the list in the legislation. And that, as it stands, is clearly inadequate, because what we've seen over the last few years is more and more crossbreeding taking place. Many of the dangerous dogs which exist and inappropriately kept sometimes as pets are not on that list, and therefore they should be prescribed. That's one thing which needs to be looked at very, very carefully. But I also think that the role of how easy it is, as we've heard in this case, it is to buy a dangerous dog is totally reprehensible. And we need much stronger safeguards in place to make sure that dogs which are obviously dangerous and untrained are not sold in this way. Perhaps we need a licensing system, but certainly what we have at the moment is inadequate for preventing situations such as this.
And Wayne David, you are a Labour MP, an opposition MP. How can you push the changes that you want to see in legislation forward? You're going to have to get the government on side for this. Do you think you're going to get there?
Well, I think it's one of those issues that needs to be a consensus on the way forward. It is not a straightforward political issue. Now, we've had a very important report produced some time ago by a select committee of the Commons, which actually queried whether or not it is appropriate to have this kind of prescribed list at all, and maybe we need a more holistic approach. But what I think is critical is that both Labour and the Conservatives and other parties get together pretty quickly and find out a way forward, because we cannot have situations, and terrible deaths such as happened to poor Jack occurring again. And the number of people who are injured, as I said, is terrible. So I think that there needs to be a cross-party consensus. The legislation needs to be examined and modified, and greater safeguards put in place for the general public.
Have you managed to speak to Jack's family at all? His mum, perhaps? Do you know how they're doing?
I haven't spoken directly, but you can imagine how difficult it is for the family in this situation. And I've been to Jack's school, and I've paid a tribute there and left flowers, and many other members of the community are doing similar and helping in a whole host of different ways. It is difficult to imagine just the shock that the family went through when they heard the terrible news of Jack's death and the way he had died. It is beyond imagination how terrible the situation has been for them.
Absolutely. If you do speak to them, please send all our love from us here.
Thank you very much.
News. Thank you, Wayne David, for giving us your time today. Now, COP is winding down, and there's been some surprisingly good news as China and the US have agreed to increase climate cooperation over the next decade. So as the summit packs up, has it been a success? Our political correspondent Tom Harwood is in Glasgow for us. Tell us, are they all feeling cheered today?
Well, it's interesting. We've been hearing a lot about these side deals, these bilateral or even multilateral deals that are technically not quite COP deals. COP, of course, means Congress of the Parties. That's 196 countries that are represented here. And so for a COP agreement, that is all of the countries that would need to be part of that. We've heard deals on forestry, on methane, on coal, and indeed, yes, that bilateral between China and the United States all over the last couple of weeks. But these are all, of course, side agreements that don't necessarily rely on the mechanisms of COP. The big question is, will there be a grand agreement of all the parties tomorrow? And there's been some fears over the course of this week that that may be weaker than was first hoped for. Indeed, all of the commitments that we've been seeing from many countries, one scary report this week suggested that would lead to 2.4 degrees warming, not 1.5 degrees warming. And of course, that is a seismic difference. It's fair to say that that report was a pessimistic one, that there are more optimistic scenarios, but it certainly clearly worried some people here. And we saw the Prime Minister hurtling back up to Glasgow by train yesterday, potentially to put some more impetus in with these talks. Now, I've been walking around some of the less fun, less bright, less jazzy corridors of this place today, where you'll see negotiators looking concerned, walking quickly, moving in and out these rooms that are completely windowless, that security guards quickly slam the doors behind the delegates as they walk in, so you can't really peek in. You're just sort of seeing these big tables with country names, and you're wondering what on earth is going on. And of course, there have been some indications that this is not going to be the sort of seismic agreement that everyone was hoping for at the start of this conference. Of course, there's still a day and a half to go. These negotiations tend to go on. I've heard suggestions that we may not get agreement, if we get agreement at all, until maybe the early hours of Saturday morning. So yes, in terms of numeric, in terms of time terms, this conference winding down, but in terms of the negotiations, things may just be hotting up.
And you've been there for the duration. What have you learned about how decisions are made at these big global events? Any insights for us?
I think that realistically, what these decisions are all telling us is that actually the amount that world leaders, that politicians, that figureheads matter when it comes to these decisions is less, and the amount that their teams and their negotiating personnel do is much more. We saw at the first 2 days of this conference that the world leaders all jetted in, they had their photo ops, they swanned round the conference. We've seen various politicians from all over the world coming and strutting their stuff in the ensuing days. But have they been doing the work? Not so much. It's been the teams that have been sitting in the not so flashy, in the windowless rooms, in the other end of the conference hall, without the enormous spinning globes and fun paraphernalia that we see politicians posing by. But it's those negotiating rooms where the real hard graft has been fought. And of course, so much of this is to do with excruciatingly legalese text. It's very hard to decipher if something is going to be as seismic as potentially it's trumped up to be by the spin teams. But I'm sure that there'll be all of these people, and I've spoken to many people for whom this is not their first COP, who have been to so many who sort of see this pattern whenever there's a big COP. And of course this Congress of the Parties is the largest one in history. It's the largest event the UK, it's the largest conference of its kind that the UK has ever held, but it's also the largest COP that has ever been held. So there's a lot riding on it, but the question is, will it live up to those enormous expectations? And that hangs in the balance.
Thank you, as ever, Tom Howard. Great to talk to you, listen to you. Coming up, we'll have the latest in my series of exclusive interviews with MPs. Today, Labour's Diana Johnson talks about the loss of her mum, why we need to change abortion laws, how to make the whips work, and how to keep MPs safe at constituency surgeries. But first, it's the news with Rosie.
I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. 2 minutes silence has been observed to remember the men and women who've lost their lives in conflict. Marked every year on the 11th hour of the 11th day on the 11th month. People across the UK pause to honour those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Armistice Day commemorates the end of the First World War. Services will also be held on Remembrance Sunday. Border Force officers have now intercepted at least 20 migrant boats attempting to cross the Channel today. Up to 50 people have been on board each vessel. 1,200 migrants have made the crossing in the past 48 hours. Thousands of care home staff in England are facing job losses now that COVID vaccines have become mandatory. From today, staff must be double jabbed to work unless they're medically exempt. Figures due to be released later are expected to show that more than 50,000 care home staff still haven't received both doses. The former president of South Africa, Frederick Willem de Klerk, has died at the age of 85. The politician who oversaw the end of the apartheid era and shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Nelson Mandela is said to have died peacefully at his home in Cape Town. NHS waiting lists in England are at a record high. Data from NHS England shows that 5.8 million people were on waiting lists at the end of September. That's the highest since records began. The chief executive of the NHS Confederation says that patient care is being compromised. Steven Gerrard says Aston Villa's ambition plans were a factor in him agreeing to become the club's new head coach. The former Liverpool and England captain has left Rangers, who he guided to the Scottish Premiership title undefeated last season. Gerrard replaces Dean Smith, who was sacked by Villa on Sunday. You are right up to date. I'll be back with more on today's news at 1 o'clock, but for now, back to Gloria.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Now it's time for the latest of my special interviews with MPs, where we go behind the politics and get to know the real person. This time, I spoke to Diana Johnson, Labour MP for Hull North since 2005. Diana Johnson, MP. Let's start at the beginning. Did you have a happy childhood?
I had a very happy childhood. My family weren't political at all, so politics didn't feature in my childhood. You know, my mum and dad voted, but that was about it. But I had a great time. I had two older brothers. I was well loved. My dad was an electrician, my mum was a housewife. I had a great childhood looking back. Sadly, my mother died when I was 16, so my teenage years were a bit difficult, but on the whole, yeah, I had a great, loving family, and I was really lucky.
Your mum died when you were 16?
Yeah, she had cancer. And it was really tough, actually, Gloria. You know, I still get upset now, and I'm 55 now, but it was really tough losing my mum when I was 16. And, you know, at that time, there wasn't a hospice locally, so she died in the local hospital. And, yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. But my family, you know, really supported me, and, you know, my two big brothers and my dad. But it was tough. And I think any young person who loses a parent, you know, it's that starkness, isn't it, about mortality. And when you're in your teens, it's particularly hard to lose a mum, as it is at any age, of course.
Did you have counselling?
No. I mean, this was back in 1983, and I was doing my A-levels, and I had a really kind of rough time. I didn't do very well in my mocks. I remember that. I did really badly in my mocks, and I'd wanted to go to university. I wanted to become a lawyer, and it was a bit of a struggle, actually. But then when I did my exams in the summer of 84, it was fine, actually. I passed, I got my grades, I was OK. But it was a bit of a difficult time, and I think something like that stays with you throughout your life. And what's interesting, I always think, is you see a lot of politicians, actually, who've lost parents either as a child or a teenager. And I think there is something in that it kind of makes you think very long and hard about your life and what you want to achieve and what you want to do with it, perhaps much sooner than perhaps people whose parents are with them until much later in their lives.
And you're a breast cancer survivor?
Yes, I am a breast cancer survivor. I had my first mammogram at 50, and I had no indication there was anything wrong, thought it was all fine, had the mammogram, and then I got called back. And I was incredibly lucky, actually, because there was no lump, nothing, and they treated me very quickly. It was a stage 1, it was very small. I only had to have radiotherapy, not chemotherapy, so I feel incredibly blessed that I was caught so early on. And I say to women now, go and get the mammogram, because it can save your life. I just feel very fortunate that I was part of that screening programme and was able to get the treatment to sort me out. And here I am 5 years on, larger than life and feeling well.
You have the fortune of having served in government. It's a fortune that I never had as a Labour MP. You were a whip.
And there's quite a lot of chats about, you know, the operations of the whips at the moment. What happens, or did you have experience of when you had to push through a vote and actually the position was very, very difficult to get MPs, Labour MPs at that time, to vote in line with what the government, the executive of that Labour government had asked you to push through?
Yeah, there were certainly times when it was tough. I was a whip under Gordon Brown, and obviously then we had, during that period, we had the expenses scandal. That was really very difficult. But also we had legislation going through that sometimes MPs, Labour MPs, didn't want to vote for. There was legislation around Heathrow and the expansion of Heathrow. So certainly you had to be very mindful and treat MPs as grown-ups. And if they really had a problem with a particular piece of legislation, you know, I would never have threatened or said, you know, you don't do this, X, Y and Z is going to happen to you. You try and talk to people, treat them as a grown-up, talk to the minister, get the minister to talk to them, and at the end of the day, get the Prime Minister to speak to them if it's something that's absolutely essential and their vote is required. So there are ways of treating people, and I have been shocked in the last week or so to hear some of the direct threats to members of Parliament. And the other key thing is that, you know, it's not just about that one vote, because you're going to have to rely on those people in the future. And so building relationships is a really important part of being a whip. And if you go in heavy on people, it can very often backfire. And in the future, when you might need them for something else, they may well not do what you want them to do or ask them to do. So there's quite a lot of psychology, I think, in the whip's office. It's not like how it used to be, you know, when it was brute force and holding people up against the wall and all of that. That certainly wasn't my experience, but it may be, perhaps, the whip's office is resorting to that again.
When one is in opposition, it's difficult to change things, because obviously there's more people in the government, on the government benches than there are on the opposition benches, which you have been on for 13 years. You have been a campaigner, though, and you have achieved change on infected blood. Just explain that. Explain why you campaigned on it and what you achieved.
You're absolutely right. Opposition is tough because you can't personally get to do very much. You have to rely on colleagues across the chamber, Conservative MPs and others, to really help you make your case. And a good example of this was the infected blood issue. So this was the biggest treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. Haemophiliacs, people who needed blood transfusions, perhaps in childbirth, some of them were given what's called dirty blood. And they contracted then hepatitis and HIV, and some sadly got AIDS. So it was a big issue. There were thousands of people affected. However, for various reasons, it never got the traction that it deserved. And various governments, including my own Labour governments, didn't really ever deal with this and tackle what had happened and how the lives of these people had been affected. So in 2010, one of my constituents turned up at a surgery and said to me, I'd had dental treatment, I needed a blood transfusion, and I was given dirty blood and I contracted hepatitis C. Will you help me? Will you help campaign to find out how that happened and for proper compensation? Because there's never been compensation paid to these people. And I said, yeah, of course I will. So I got involved with the all-party group, cross-party, and we campaigned for years. We got David Cameron to actually finally issue an apology in about 2015. But we never got the public inquiry, and it was only in 2017 when Theresa May had lost or had just won the election, but she didn't have a majority, and she was trying to do deals with the DUP. And at that point, we got all the opposition leaders to sign a letter to Theresa May to say that they were going to call a vote. They were going to have a vote in Parliament about the infected blood scandal. And I think that really freaked out the Prime Minister, actually, because the DUP had signed that, and it would meant that she would lose any vote in Parliament. And John Bercow, as Speaker, was really helpful. We had various procedures we could do in the House to try and force this along. To cut a long story short, I received a telephone call telling me that Downing Street were going to announce a public inquiry, which people have been campaigning for 30, 40 years. So that was a huge tribute, really, to the campaigners over all those years, but using Parliament and using the House of Commons and using MPs from across the chamber to actually get justice, we hope, for a group who for so many years have been overlooked.
And it's interesting that how that case came to you was via a constituency surgery.
Yes, and I think MPs find, don't they, that the big issues that they take up often come from a constituent sitting down and saying, I need your help and this is what's happened to me.
The question is, are they safe in their current form? I'm going to put it out there, I don't think they are.
Are they
constituency surgeries? They're not safe in its existing form, and I don't know if any more evidence is needed to demonstrate that.
I think you've got to you're absolutely right there, actually. I mean, I've stopped doing face-to-face surgeries. I've been doing Zoom surgeries and telephone surgeries throughout COVID, and I thought this autumn I would go back to face-to-face, but I've decided not to. I'm going to wait until the new year. I've always asked for people's name and address before they come. I have done surgeries when I've stood in McDonald's or a shopping centre and just anyone's been able to speak to me. But I think you're absolutely right. Now, I am nervous about that, and I shouldn't be, but I do feel nervous.
What's the answer? Is it to provide a police presence for MPs at those surgeries? Although that would freak some constituents out. It's really difficult to know what the answer is.
It would, because in your surgeries you will know. You know, I'm just thinking back, I had a woman who came to me because she'd had a terrible experience reporting a rape to the police. Now, if the police were there, somehow in the room or outside the room, that may well have been something that woman wouldn't want to talk to me about. So I don't think having the police there is the answer. I think what I've learnt over the last 16 years is that there's a coarsening in the debate in this country, and it's become acceptable to be rude, aggressive, obnoxious, when really you are entitled to have your view, I'm entitled to have my view. We can disagree, but we can do that agreeably. And I think the threats, particularly women MPs get on social media, that's a big issue.
You talked about cross-party working, and you are now chair of the all-party parliamentary group on women's health, the chair of the APPG on sexual and reproductive health. Why? What are you campaigning on now?
Well, there's a few issues in that, actually. I mean, we've done a recent report on access to contraception. We found that actually access to contraception has reduced over the last few years, not just during COVID, but before, because of the fragmentation of budgets and responsibility for providing contraceptive services. We've had cuts to public health budgets, and public health is responsible for sexual health in communities. So that's another problem. And we've also been looking at abortion and abortion services and whether the current law is actually right for 2021. Of course, the abortion law came in 1967, a great landmark piece of legislation, but medical advances over the last 50-odd years mean that act is now very out of date and needs to be reformed. But it's a very contentious issue, and governments don't normally want to touch anything around abortion because it's a free vote. So we've certainly got views about what we think should happen around abortion. We think certainly it shouldn't be, it's based on the criminal law, and we think that's wrong. It's based on a Victorian statute where it says if a woman tries to procure her own miscarriage or someone helps her, they can end up going to prison for life. So the 67 Act set out very specific conditions when an abortion can be carried out. So it has to be with 2 doctors, it has to be in a clinic, and there are various other conditions that have to be met. But if you don't meet those conditions, then you could be liable under the Criminal Act that I just referred to. So we think that's the wrong way of doing things now. It should be taken out of the criminal law. It should be seen as a health matter between a woman and her doctor. Of course, it should be regulated and there should be proper provision around the regulation, but it should not be a criminal matter. So things like that, as an MP, we pass laws, but then over time, those laws may well be out of date, and I think it's my job as an MP to point this out and say why the law should be changed.
We were both MPs when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party. Lots of people, undoubtedly, particularly young people, liked Jeremy Corbyn. The Labour Party at that point was in civil war. There is no doubt about it. It was a very difficult period for anybody involved in the Labour Party of whatever wing of the Labour Party they were from. There was a campaign for all Labour MPs to undergo a reselection process by their party members. A lot of time was spent trying to prevent that. We wasted, arguably, a lot of time stopping those attempts to get rid of Labour MPs, and made the argument that surely the effort should be on getting rid of Tory MPs. You were one of only 2 Labour MPs who went through a full reselection in 2019. How was that?
Oh, it was awful. And I've been an MP since 2005, so I've been through reselections before, but this was particularly awful. And the key thing for me was the rules had been changed, so a minority of members of the party could force the majority of members of the party to have to go through a full open selection. And you're absolutely right, Gloria. I was reselected, I think, on the Friday night, and the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, called the general election for the December 2019 on the following Monday or Tuesday. So there was a weekend between me being reselected, having spent the previous 3-4 months focusing solely on the number of members in my constituency, not knocking on the doors and talking to the electorate, but focusing in on that much smaller number to get them to vote for me at an open reselection. And overwhelmingly, it was 3/4 of the vote at the reselection voted for me to carry on. So I certainly have no problem with going through reselections in every parliament. That's absolutely the right thing to do. But the rules that were brought in by Jeremy Corbyn and his group really were not about democracy. That was about trying to bring in people of the same ideological ilk as Jeremy. And actually, the Labour Party, as you know, is a broad party. We're a coalition, actually, aren't we? There's more on the right and then the centre and there's some on the left, and we come together and we agree on various policies. But to try and remove MPs, sitting MPs, I just think at that time, you know, our focus needed to be on the electorate and certainly not on the internal machinations of the Labour Party. So it was a really horrible time to go through, actually. I'm just glad that my members voted for me and I carried on. And it was really ironic because I think the year before I'd been voted Backbencher of the Year for the work I'd done on the infected blood scandal. And so it was really, yeah, it was really unpleasant.
Finally, to go back to where we started, your dad was an electrician, your mum was a housewife. Does there need to be more members of Parliament with stories and backgrounds like that?
Yes, I think we need to have a range of people in Parliament, and certainly, you know, I don't come from a political family. In fact, my dad, I remember when I was 16, he said I was going through a phase because I joined the Labour Party, and here I am now, you know, 40 years on, still going through that phase. I think we need a variety of people, don't we? We need to have that breadth in Parliament when we make decisions. And so if you come from a very privileged background, that's fine, but it shouldn't be the majority of people in the Commons. And I feel really proud of my parents as well, because they had me when they were a bit older, and they fought in the war, and my dad was in the Navy and my mum worked in a munitions factory. And I think that instilled in me that you know, that public service and wanting to give back. So, you know, I'm really proud of my parents and my family, but I think you're absolutely right. We need more ordinary people to get involved in politics. And in fact, there are lots of ordinary people in Parliament already, but we don't often hear about them.
Well, we've heard from one today. Diana Johnson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. The show is back every weekday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan, and then Liam and I will be together between 2 and 3. But for now, I'll leave you with your weather forecast.
Hello. For some, it will be a fine, bright day, but generally a fairly grey affair for many. Not a lot of rain around, most places dry. Tonight it is going to turn quite windy. That's thanks to this area of low pressure that's been winding itself up overnight. Not arriving just yet, however. A couple of weak weather fronts still sitting over the UK. They are fizzling out, but leaving a lot of cloud. Some sunny spells over northeast England, northeast Scotland, and at times it'll brighten up across the south. But equally, 1 or 2 light showers possible over southwest England, Wales, maybe southwest Scotland, and increasingly